Captain Elara Voss stood on the observation deck of the Elysian Dawn, her eyes fixed on the swirling chaos of the Veil of Eternity. No ship had ever crossed it and returned. Behind her, the crew, 8 specialists chosen for their unmatched skills, exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. They weren't just explorers, they were pioneers, tasked with uncovering the secrets of a civilization lost to time. But the veil wasn't just a barrier, it was a guardian, a force of nature that defied understanding. As the ship powered forward, the crew braced themselves. What lay beyond wasn't just a mystery, it was a choice between eternal silence and a revelation that could change everything. This is the story of the 9 Cosmic Voyagers and their journey into the unknown. The Elysian Dawn shuddered as it broke through the veil, emerging into a star system that defied every expectation. Twin suns burned in the distance, their light casting an otherworldly glow across the void. Below, a barren planet orbited silently, its surface cracked and lifeless. But what caught their attention was the derelict space station, hovering in orbit, its skeletal frame looming like a forgotten relic of a bygone era. Captain Elara Voss took a deep breath, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. "This isn't just a station," she murmured. "It's a puzzle, and we're here to solve it." Dr. Kale, the ship's xenobiologist, stepped forward, his voice tense. "Captain, we don't know what we're dealing with. That station could be a trap, or worse, a tomb. We should proceed with extreme caution." His warning hung in the air, a reminder that not everyone shared Elara's confidence. But the crew knew their mission. They had come too far to turn back now. Elara nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We'll split into 2 teams. Dr. Kale, you'll stay aboard and monitor from here. The rest of us will investigate the station. Keep the comms open." The crew moved swiftly, their training kicking in as they prepared for the unknown. Elara led the first team through the airlock, her pulse steady despite the unease gnawing at the edges of her mind. Inside the station, the air was thick with dust and the faint hum of dormant machinery. Ancient technology lined the walls, intricate patterns etched into surfaces that seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. It was as though the station was alive, waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. "This isn't just old," muttered Ensign Rin, the ship's engineer, as he ran a scanner over a console. "It's advanced, far beyond anything we've ever seen." But before they could delve deeper, the station shuddered. A power surge coursed through the walls, and the team found themselves sealed inside a chamber, the door slamming shut with a resounding clang. Elara's heart raced as she tested the controls, but they were unresponsive. "We're trapped," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Options." The team exchanged glances, their minds racing. "We could try to override the system," Rin suggested, "but it might damage the station. If this place is as fragile as it looks, we could bring the whole thing down on top of us." Elara weighed the risks. Time was slipping away, and the rest of the crew outside had no way of knowing what had happened. She had to decide: force their way out and risk destroying the station, or wait for help that might never come. Every second counted, and the weight of leadership pressed down on her shoulders like never before. Meanwhile, aboard the Elysian Dawn, Engineer Rin's console flickered with an unusual pattern. A faint signal pulsed rhythmically, emanating from the barren planet below. It wasn't like any transmission she'd encountered before. Too deliberate, too ancient. Her fingers danced across the controls as she isolated the frequency, her brow furrowing in concentration. This isn't random noise, she muttered to herself. It's a message, or a beacon. Turning to Navigator Jax, who was busy plotting their return trajectory, she pitched her idea. We need to check this out. If there's something down there, it could be the key to understanding this system, or even the veil itself. Jax hesitated, his pragmatic nature clashing with her curiosity. We're not equipped for a planetary landing, he countered. And what if it's a trap? We'd be leaving the captain and the others stranded if something goes wrong. Rin leaned in, her voice firm but persuasive. We've got the shuttle ready to go, a quick in and out. If we find nothing, no harm done. But if there's a clue down there, something that could help the crew, we'd be fools to ignore it. Jack sighed, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. All right, but we make it fast, no unnecessary risks. The shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere, its engines humming softly as it approached the desolate surface. The planet was a wasteland of cracked earth and jagged rock formations, but the signal led them to a massive, crater-like depression. As they landed, the true scale of their discovery became apparent. Rising from the dust was a colossal structure, half buried and covered in intricate hieroglyphs that glowed faintly under the shuttle's lights. This isn't natural, Jack said, his voice tinged with awe. Someone built this a long time ago. Rin stepped out first, her scanner in hand. As she approached the structure, the hieroglyphs seemed to shift and shimmer, as if reacting to her presence. She began recording, her excitement growing with every symbol she deciphered. It's a warning, she said finally, her voice low. This place, it's a tomb. Not for individuals, but for an entire civilization. They thrived here once, but their own arrogance destroyed them. They built something they couldn't control. Jax's expression darkened. If that's true, then we're standing on their grave, and whatever wiped them out might still be here. He glanced around, the weight of the discovery settling over him. We need to tell the captain. The crew deserves to know. Rin hesitated, her gaze fixed on the hieroglyphs. What if it breaks their resolve? If they think this mission is doomed before we even find answers? What then? Maybe we wait, figure out more before we drop this on them. Jax crossed his arms, his tone firm. Keeping secrets will only breed distrust. They need to know the risks, even if it's hard to hear. The two stood in silence, the gravity of their discovery pressing down on them. To share the truth could unite the crew, giving them a common purpose to avoid the fate of those who came before. But to withhold it, that could fracture their trust irreparably. The decision weighed heavily, and the fate of the mission, and perhaps their lives hinged on what they chose to do next. The chamber's walls seemed to close in, as Elara and her team worked frantically to override the door controls. Sparks flew from the console as Ensign Rin's tools dug into the ancient circuitry, his hands moving with precision despite the urgency. Almost there, he muttered, his voice tight with concentration. With a final surge of power, The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. But their relief was short-lived. The moment they stepped out, the station's defense system roared to life, its mechanical sentinels emerging from hidden compartments with weapons trained on the intruders. "Move," Elara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos as the team scrambled for cover. The air filled with the crackle of energy beams, each one narrowly missing its mark as the crew dove behind crumbling pillars and overturned consoles. Communications Officer Tessa, lagging slightly behind, wasn't as fortunate. A stray shot grazed her shoulder, sending her sprawling to the ground with a cry of pain. Elara's heart clenched as she saw Tessa fall, but there was no time to hesitate. "Get her to safety," Elara ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. Two crew members rushed to Tessa's side, dragging her behind a makeshift barricade. The station's defenses showed no signs of relenting, their relentless assault forcing the team into a corner. Elara's mind raced. They could retreat now, regroup on the Elysian Dawn, and tend to Tessa's wounds. But the station's secrets, its ancient technology, and the civilization that built it, were within reach. To leave now might mean losing their chance forever. Her jaw tightened as she made her decision. "We're not leaving," she declared, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We deactivate the system. Rin, find the control hub. The rest of you, cover him. We don't stop until this place is ours." The team nodded, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They knew the risks, but they also trusted their captain. As they pressed forward, weaving through the station's labyrinthine corridors, Elara couldn't shake the doubt creeping into her thoughts. Was she pushing them too far? Was the pursuit of knowledge worth the lives of her crew? Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of leadership pressing down on her. But she pushed the doubts aside. There would be time for reflection later, if they survived. Rin led the way, his scanner guiding them toward the heart of the station's defense system. The closer they got, the more intense the resistance became. Automated turrets sprang from the walls, their targeting systems locking onto the team with deadly precision. "We're close," Rin shouted over the din of blaster fire. Just a little further, Elara's instincts screamed at her to turn back, to prioritize her crew's safety over the mission. But she couldn't, not yet. The station held answers that might save countless lives, or doom them all if left unchecked. As they reached the control hub, the team worked in perfect sync, their training and trust in one another shining through the chaos. But even as Rin began the delicate process of deactivating the system, Elara's gaze drifted to Tessa, her pale face etched with pain. The cost of this mission was becoming all too clear. And in that moment, Elara couldn't help but wonder, when the secrets of the universe came at such a price, was it worth it? The question lingered, unanswered, as the station's defenses finally fell silent, leaving only the echo of their struggle in the cold, empty halls. Deeper within the structure, Rin and Jax pressed forward, their footsteps echoing in the vast, hollow chamber. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dust and the faint hum of dormant machinery. As they rounded a corner, a sudden burst of light illuminated the space, revealing a massive holographic projection that filled the room. The image flickered to life, depicting a thriving civilization, towering spires of gleaming metal, bustling streets filled with beings of light and shadow, and a sky alive with ships, unlike anything they had ever seen. But the scene shifted, and the mood darkened. The hologram showed a cataclysmic event, an explosion of unimaginable scale, tearing through their world and leaving nothing but ruins in its wake. Rin's eyes widened as she stepped closer, her scanner whirring as it tried to make sense of the data. "This isn't just a record," she said, her voice brimming with awe. "It's a warning. They had access to an energy source, something beyond anything we've ever imagined, but they couldn't control it. It destroyed them." Her fingers traced the edge of a glowing control panel, her mind already racing with possibilities. If we could find it, harness it, this could change everything. Faster than light travel, unlimited power. We could leap centuries ahead in technology. Jax, however, remained rooted in place, his expression tense. "Did you not just see what happened? They were wiped out because they messed with something they didn't understand, and you want to dig it up." His voice was low, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. "This isn't just a discovery, Rin. It's a tombstone, a reminder of what happens when you reach too far, too fast." Rin turned to face him, her excitement clashing with his caution. "We're not them. We've learned from our mistakes, but from theirs. This could be the key to everything we've been searching for. Don't you see? This isn't just about us. It's about humanity's future." She gestured to the hologram, her voice rising with conviction. "We have a chance to take what they lost and make it better. To ensure their sacrifice wasn't in vain." Jax shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Or we could repeat their mistakes and end up just like them, buried under the rubble of our own hubris." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This isn't just about science, Rin. It's about survival, and sometimes survival means leaving well enough alone." The tension between them crackled like static, their opposing views pulling them further apart. Rin's passion for discovery clashed with Jax's pragmatism, each argument driving a deeper wedge into their partnership. "You're letting fear dictate your decisions," Rin accused, her frustration boiling over. "If we always played it safe, we'd still be stuck on Earth, staring at the stars and wondering what could have been. And if we're not careful," Jax shot back, "we'll be staring at the stars because there's nothing left of us to go back to." He crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't fear, it's responsibility. To the crew, to the mission, to everyone who's counting on us to bring them home." The argument hung heavy in the air, neither willing to back down. Rin's obsession with the energy source and its potential clashed with Jax's fear of repeating a catastrophic history. The divide between them wasn't just ideological, it was personal. And as the hologram flickered behind them, showing the final moments of the civilization's downfall, it was clear that their decision would shape not just their own fates, but the future of the entire crew. The weight of their choices pressed down on them, a silent reminder that some secrets were buried for a reason, and uncovering them came at a price. The station fell silent as the last of its defenses powered down, the hum of energy dissipating into the cold, empty air. Elara crouched beside Tessa, her hands pressing firmly against the wound on the officer's shoulder. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage, staining the fabric a dark crimson. Tessa's face was pale, her breathing shallow, and the sight of her suffering sent a ripple of unease through the team. "We need to get her back to the Elysian Dawn," Elara said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. The crew moved quickly, their earlier triumph overshadowed by the grim reality of their situation. Back on the ship, the medbay buzzed with activity as the medical team worked to stabilize Tessa. The mood among the crew was heavy, their earlier confidence replaced by a somber tension. Elara stood at the head of the briefing room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her team. They were battered, exhausted, and now, more than ever, they needed clarity. "We've come this far," she began, her tone firm but empathetic. "But we've lost something today, not just Tessa's strength, but a piece of our unity. We need to regroup, and we need to decide what comes next." At her signal, Rin and Jax stepped forward, their earlier discovery now laid bare before the crew. Rin's eyes sparkled with excitement as she recounted the holographic warning and the potential of the ancient energy source. "This isn't just about uncovering secrets," she insisted. "It's about unlocking a future we've only dreamed of. Faster than light travel, unlimited energy. This could change everything for humanity." Her words were met with murmurs of interest, some crew members leaning forward, captivated by the possibilities. But Jax was quick to counter, his voice calm but resolute. "We saw what happened to the civilization that came before us. They reached too far, too fast, and it destroyed them. We can't afford to make the same mistake. This isn't just about progress, it's about survival." His warning struck a chord, and the room divided. Some nodded in agreement, their expressions grim, while others exchanged uneasy glances, torn between ambition and caution. Elara listened intently, her mind racing as she weighed the arguments. The crew's morale hung in the balance, their trust in her leadership more fragile than ever. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the stakes higher than they'd ever been. "Both of you make valid points," she said finally, her voice cutting through the tension. "But we can't let fear paralyze us, nor can we let ambition blind us. We'll investigate the energy source, but with safeguards, strict protocols, constant monitoring, and a clear exit strategy. If anything goes wrong, we pull back immediately, no exceptions." Her decision was met with a mix of relief and apprehension. Rin's face lit up, her enthusiasm tempered only by the gravity of the moment. Jax, though still cautious, respected the captain's pragmatism. The crew began to disperse, their voices low but purposeful as they prepared for the next phase of the mission. Elara lingered for a moment, her thoughts drifting to Tessa, still unconscious in the medbay. The cost of their journey was becoming painfully clear, and with every step forward, the line between discovery and danger grew thinner. But they had come too far to turn back now. The energy source beckoned, its secrets waiting to be uncovered, and with them, the future of the Nine Cosmic Voyagers. The journey into the planet's depths began in silence, the crew's footsteps echoing through the narrow, winding tunnels. Rin led the way, her scanner casting a faint blue glow on the walls as she followed a series of cryptic symbols etched into the stone. "These markings are like a map," she explained, her voice low but steady, "but they're also a test. Whoever built this place wanted to make sure only the worthy could proceed." Her words hung in the air, a reminder that every step forward came with a price. The first challenge came without warning. A sudden shift in the ground triggered a cascade of falling rocks, forcing the team to sprint through a narrowing passage. Elara shouted commands, her voice cutting through the chaos as the crew scrambled to safety. But as the dust settled, the tension in the air was palpable. "This isn't just about physical endurance," murmured Dr. Kale, his usual calm demeanor fraying at the edges. "It's psychological. These traps are designed to break us." The next challenge proved him right. A massive chamber stretched before them, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not their faces, but their deepest fears. One by one, the crew stepped forward, each confronted by visions of their own insecurities. For Ensign Rin, it was the fear of failure, of being unable to unlock the secrets they sought. For Jax, it was the haunting memory of a mission gone wrong, one that had cost lives. And for Elara, her reflection twisted into the face of her late mentor, his voice echoing accusations of inadequacy. "You're not ready for this," the vision whispered. "You'll lead them to their doom." Elara clenched her fists, her jaw tightening as she pushed the vision aside. But the damage was done. The crew's confidence in her leadership wavered, their expressions a mix of doubt and unease. "We're in this together," she said, her voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "But I need you to trust me, now more than ever." Her words were met with hesitant nods, but the cracks in their unity were beginning to show. The final chamber loomed ahead, its entrance sealed by a massive door covered in intricate carvings. Rin's scanner indicated that the key to unlocking it lay not in technology, but in sacrifice. "It's a test of resolve," she explained, her voice tinged with unease. "To open this door, someone has to give up something they hold dear." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, each grappling with what they might have to lose. Elara stepped forward, her hand brushing against the pendant she always wore, a gift from her mentor, the man who had shaped her into the leader she was today. It was more than a trinket. It was a symbol of everything she aspired to be. Her fingers trembled as she unclasped it, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is what I have to give." She placed the pendant into the slot on the door, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. The door groaned open, revealing a vast chamber bathed in an eerie, golden light. The crew stepped inside, their awe momentarily overshadowing the tension that had gripped them. But as they ventured deeper, the true nature of the test became clear. This wasn't just about unlocking a door. It was about proving their worth to themselves and to each other. Elara's sacrifice had opened the way, but the challenges ahead would demand even more. The labyrinth had revealed their fears, but it had also uncovered their strengths. And as they moved forward, the question lingered, would those strengths be enough to see them through? The chamber glowed with an otherworldly light as the crew stepped into the heart of the labyrinth. At its center, suspended in a web of shimmering energy, was the source of it all, a massive crystal, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the universe itself. Rin's eyes widened, her earlier exhaustion replaced by a surge of exhilaration. "This is it," she breathed, her voice trembling with awe. "The energy source. It's more incredible than I ever imagined. She moved closer, her scanner whirring as it struggled to process the sheer magnitude of power radiating from the crystal. Jax, however, hung back, his expression darkening as he scanned the room. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered, his voice low but urgent. "That thing, it's too unstable. Look at the readings, it's like it's barely contained. If we tamper with it, we could set off a chain reaction we can't control." His warning hung in the air, a stark contrast to Rin's excitement. The crew hesitated, caught between the allure of discovery and the instinct to survive. Before the debate could escalate, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the chamber as cracks spider-webbed across the walls. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the crew scrambled to steady themselves. "The structure, it's collapsing," shouted Dr. Kale, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of falling rock. The labyrinth, it seemed, had one final test for them, a self-destruct sequence triggered by their intrusion. Panic surged through the group as they realized the gravity of the situation. "We need to get out of here now," Jax barked, his pragmatism cutting through the chaos. But as the crew turned to retreat, the crystal's energy began to fluctuate wildly, its light intensifying to a blinding glare. The air crackled with electricity, and the walls groaned under the strain of the destabilizing power. It wasn't just the labyrinth that was at risk, it was the entire planet. Elara's mind raced as she assessed the situation. The crystal was on the verge of a catastrophic explosion, and there was no time to safely extract it. Her gaze swept over her crew, her team, her responsibility. "Go," she ordered, her voice firm despite the chaos. "Get to the shuttle. I'll stay behind and try to contain the blast." The crew froze, disbelief etched on their faces. "Captain, you can't," Rin began, but Elara cut her off with a sharp look. "This isn't up for debate. If we don't stop this, none of us are making it out alive. Now move." Her tone left no room for argument, and the crew hesitated only a moment longer before turning to flee, their footsteps echoing in the crumbling chamber. As the last of them disappeared down the tunnel, Elara turned her attention to the crystal. Its energy was spiraling out of control, the light so intense it was almost painful to look at. She began working furiously, her hands moving over the ancient control panel with a precision born of desperation. The labyrinth groaned around her, its walls collapsing inward as the structure prepared to bury itself, and her, forever. Her thoughts turned to the crew, to the sacrifices they'd made, and the trust they'd placed in her. She couldn't let them down now. With a final adjustment, the control panel sparked to life, initiating a containment protocol that would buy them precious time. But it came at a cost. The explosion would still happen, and she would be at its epicenter. The ground shook violently, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning ozone. Elara stood tall, her resolve unshaken, even as the walls closed in around her. She had made her choice, and she would see it through to the end. The crystal's light flared one last time, illuminating her face as the chamber collapsed in a deafening roar. Outside, the crew raced toward the shuttle, the weight of their captain's sacrifice pressing heavily on their hearts. The labyrinth had tested them in ways they could never have imagined, and now, as the planet trembled beneath their feet, they faced the ultimate question: Had they truly earned the right to carry its secrets into the stars? The shuttle bay doors hissed open as the crew sprinted toward safety, the ground quaking beneath their feet with increasing intensity. Behind them, the labyrinth crumbled, its ancient walls collapsing in a deafening roar. But deep within its core, Elara remained, her hands steady on the alien console as she worked to stabilize the crystal. The air around her crackled with energy, each pulse of light sending a jolt through her body. She could feel the station's systems reaching out to her, their alien intelligence probing her mind. It wasn't just a machine, it was alive, and it demanded a connection. Elara gritted her teeth as the interface activated, tendrils of light wrapping around her arms and torso. Her vision blurred, then sharpened into a cascade of images. Flashes of a civilization at its zenith, their cities gleaming beneath twin suns, their voices echoing with pride and ambition. But the images shifted, showing their downfall, the crystal's power spiraling out of control, their world consumed in a blaze of light and ash. She felt their grief, their regret, as though it were her own. The visions weren't just memories, they were warnings, and they came with a price. Her body convulsed as the system merged with her nervous system, the alien technology rewriting her senses. Her mind teetered on the edge of dissolution, the weight of the lost civilization's collective consciousness threatening to overwhelm her. But amidst the chaos, a voice emerged, calm, ancient, and resonant. It was the crystal itself, not a mere object but a sentient being, its presence vast and incomprehensible yet strangely familiar. "You are the first to hear me in millennia," it whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. "The others sought to control me, to use my power without understanding. But you are different." Elara's breath came in ragged gasps as she struggled to maintain her sense of self. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The crystal's response was immediate, its tone both solemn and hopeful. "A pact, a promise. I will lend you my power, but you must wield it with wisdom and humility. The energy I hold is not a tool, it is a responsibility. Will you accept this burden?" The question hung in the air, the weight of it pressing down on her like the collapsing walls of the labyrinth. She thought of her crew, racing to safety, their trust in her leadership unshaken even now. She thought of the countless lives that could be saved or lost depending on her choice, and she thought of the civilization that had come before, their ambitions leading to their ruin. This wasn't just about power, it was about balance, about learning from the past to build a better future. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging around her. The moment the words left her lips, the crystal's energy surged, flooding her with warmth and light. The vision ceased, replaced by a profound clarity. She understood now not just the crystal's purpose, but her own. The pact was sealed, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a captain anymore, she was a guardian, a bridge between the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future. As the labyrinth continued to collapse around her, Elara activated the final protocol, the crystal's energy stabilizing into a steady, controlled pulse. The ground ceased its violent shaking, and the air grew still. She had done it. She had contained the explosion. But as she turned to leave, the crystal's voice echoed one final time. "Remember this moment, Elara Voss. The power you now carry is not yours to command. It is yours to protect. Use it wisely. With one last glance at the crystal, now glowing with a serene light, Elara made her way to the surface. The crew was waiting, their faces a mix of relief and concern as she emerged from the ruins. They didn't know the full extent of what had happened, but they could see the change in her, the quiet resolve in her eyes, the weight of her new responsibility. Together, they boarded the shuttle, leaving the labyrinth and its secrets behind. The 9 Cosmic Voyagers had faced the unknown and emerged transformed. But their journey was far from over. The crystal's power was now a part of them, and with it came a choice: to repeat the mistakes of the past or to forge a new path forward. The stars awaited, and their story was just beginning. The shuttle bay doors sealed shut with a hiss, the crew's collective breaths heavy with exhaustion and relief. Elara stepped forward, her presence commanding yet altered. The crew turned to her, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and unease. She stood taller, her gaze sharper, but there was something else, an almost imperceptible glow that seemed to emanate from her. It was as if the labyrinth had imprinted its secrets onto her very being. "We need to talk," she began, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that silenced the room. The crystal, it's not just a source of power, it's alive, and it's chosen us, chosen me, to carry its legacy. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of her words sinking in. Rin stepped forward first, her eyes alight with curiosity. "Do you understand it? Can we use it?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement. But before Elara could respond, Jax cut in, his tone laced with skepticism. "Use it, look at her. Something's changed. How do we know this thing hasn't taken over?" His words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the risks they'd already faced. The room split into murmurs, some crew members nodding in agreement with Rin, others echoing Jax's concerns. Elara raised a hand, her calm authority cutting through the rising tension. "I'm still me," she said firmly, "but I've seen things I can't fully explain yet. The crystal isn't a weapon or a tool, it's a responsibility. And if we're going to survive what comes next, we need to understand that." Her words carried an undeniable truth, but the fear in the room was palpable. The crew had trusted her with their lives, but now they were faced with a choice: to follow her into the unknown or question the very foundation of her leadership. As they returned to the Elysian Dawn, the divide grew deeper. Rin and Jax found themselves at the heart of the conflict, their opposing views reflecting the crew's growing unease. "This is what we came here for," Rin argued, her voice passionate. "We've been given a chance to change everything, to leap forward in ways we couldn't have dreamed of. Are we really going to throw that away because we're scared?" Jax crossed his arms, his expression hardened. "Scared? No. Cautious. We've seen what happens when people mess with forces they don't understand. This isn't just about us. It's about everyone who's counting on us to get back alive." His words struck a chord, and the room fell silent once more. The stakes were clear: ambition versus survival, progress versus caution. And in the middle of it all stood Elara, tasked with uniting a crew on the brink of fracture. As the ship powered up, preparing for the journey home, Elara retreated to the observation deck. The twin suns of the system cast a golden light across the ship, their glow a stark contrast to the storm brewing within. She knew the challenges ahead were more than just technical. They were personal. The crystal's power was immense, but so were the risks. And as she gazed out at the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The crystal had chosen her, but the crew's trust was something she would have to earn all over again. And with the fate of the Elysian Dawn hanging in the balance, there was no room for error. The stars ahead were calling, but the echoes of the labyrinth's warnings lingered, a reminder that some paths were best walked with care. The Elysian Dawn hummed with activity as the crew worked to finalize their departure from the star system. The ship's engines roared to life, their steady thrum a comforting reminder of home. But just as they began to break orbit, the sensors blared a warning. On the view screen, a fleet of alien vessels materialized, their sleek, angular designs unlike anything the crew had ever encountered. Each ship gleamed with an eerie, silver light, their formation precise and menacing. At the center of the fleet was a massive flagship, its silhouette bristling with weaponry and adorned with symbols that pulsed with an ancient, almost sacred energy. A transmission crackled through the comms, and the crew froze as a figure appeared on the screen. Tall and imposing, the Arbiter's form was shrouded in a flowing cloak that seemed to shimmer with starlight. Their voice, deep and resonant, carried an air of authority that demanded attention. "You have taken what is not yours," the Arbiter intoned, their words echoing with a gravity that sent a chill through the room. "The crystal is a relic of my people, a fragment of our history and our power. Return it or face destruction." Elara stepped forward, her expression calm but her mind racing. "We didn't steal it," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension. "We found it abandoned, buried beneath the ruins of a civilization that destroyed itself. If it belongs to your people, we had no way of knowing, but we're willing to return it if you'll allow us to explain." Her words were measured, diplomatic, but the Arbiter's gaze remained unyielding. "Explanation is irrelevant," the Arbiter said coldly. "Your trespass cannot be forgiven. Surrender the crystal, or your ship will be reduced to ash." The threat hung in the air, the weight of it pressing down on the crew. Behind Elara, Rin, and Jax exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier conflict momentarily forgotten in the face of this new crisis. The crew turned to Elara, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. "What do we do?" Rin asked, her voice trembling. "If we give it back, we lose everything we've worked for." "But if we fight," she trailed off, the unspoken consequences clear. The alien fleet outnumbered them, their technology far beyond anything the Elysian Dawn could match. Jax, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "We can't win this fight," he said bluntly. "Not with what we've got. If we try to run, they'll catch us. The only way out of this alive is to surrender the crystal." His words were met with murmurs of agreement, but not everyone was convinced. Elara's gaze swept over her crew, her mind weighing the options. To surrender the crystal would mean abandoning the mission, the very purpose that had driven them this far. But to defy the Arbiter's demand would risk not just their lives, but the fragile alliance they had forged with the crystal itself. She could feel its presence within her, a quiet, steady pulse that seemed to whisper guidance. It wasn't just an object, it was a responsibility, one she had sworn to protect. As the silence stretched, the Arbiter's voice cut through once more. Your time runs short. Choose wisely, for the consequences of your decision will echo far beyond this moment. The words were a stark reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just about the crystal or their mission. It was about the balance of power in a galaxy far larger than they had ever imagined. Elara straightened, her resolve hardening. "We'll return the crystal," she said, her voice firm, but not out of fear, out of respect. "We've seen what happens when power is misused, and we won't repeat the mistakes of those who came before us." Her words carried a weight that silenced the room, the crew's earlier tension giving way to a quiet determination. The Arbiter studied her for a long moment, their expression unreadable. Then, with a nod, they replied, "Your choice will be remembered, but know this, the crystal's power is not yours to wield. It is a burden, one that my people have borne for millennia. If you are truly worthy of its trust, you will understand why it must return to us." As the transmission ended, the crew turned to Elara, their faces a mix of relief and uncertainty. The decision had been made, but the path ahead was anything but clear. The Elysian Dawn would leave the star system, but the echoes of their encounter with the Arbiter would linger, a reminder that their journey was far from over. The crystal's power had brought them this far, but its true purpose, and their role in its story, remained shrouded in mystery. And as the ship prepared to depart, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges were yet to come. The tension aboard the Elysian Dawn was palpable as the alien fleet loomed closer, their weapons glowing ominously in the void of space. Elara stood at the helm, her mind racing through every possible option. Surrender wasn't an option, not when the crystal's power had entrusted itself to her, but neither was a direct confrontation. The fleet outnumbered them, outgunned them, and their technology was beyond anything the crew had ever faced. There had to be another way. Elara's eyes flicked to the crystal, now secured in the ship's core. Its faint pulse seemed to quicken, as though responding to her thoughts. "We don't need to outrun them," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. "We need to outthink them. If we can harness the crystal's energy, even for a moment, we could create a temporary wormhole, a shortcut through space. It's risky, but it's our only chance." The crew turned to her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. "A wormhole," Rin repeated, her voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. "Do we even have the capability to pull that off? The ship's systems aren't designed for something like this." Elara nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We'll have to modify them." "Rin, you and Jax work on recalibrating the engines. Tessa, I need you to reroute power to the core. Everyone else, prepare for the strain this will put on the ship. It's going to be rough, but if we do this right, we can make it." Her tone was calm, but the weight of the decision was clear. This wasn't just a plan. It was a gamble, one that could either save them or tear the ship apart. The crew sprang into action, their earlier divisions momentarily forgotten in the face of the crisis. Rin and Jax worked side by side, their hands flying over the control panels as they rewired the engines. Tessa, still pale but determined, redirected power with precision, her focus unshakable. The ship groaned under the strain, its systems pushed to their limits. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning metal. But no one stopped. They couldn't. Outside, the Arbiter's fleet drew closer, their weapons charging with a menacing hum. The flagship fired first, a blinding beam of energy streaking toward the Elysian Dawn. The ship shuddered violently as the blast struck its shields, the impact sending the crew stumbling. "Shields at 40%, shouted Dr. Kale, his voice tight with urgency. "Another hit like that, and we're done." Elara's hands clenched the edge of the console, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. "We need more time," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the progress bar on the screen. It was agonizingly slow, the system straining to adapt to the crystal's immense energy. But there was no alternative. They had to hold on. The Arbiter's voice crackled through the comms once more, their tone icy and unrelenting. "This is your final warning. Surrender the crystal or be destroyed." Elara ignored the threat, her attention locked on the readouts. The wormhole generator was almost online, but the fleet was closing in fast. "Rin, Jax, how much longer?" she called, her voice sharp with urgency. "Almost there," Rin shouted back, her fingers flying over the controls. "But if we push it any faster, the engines could." Her words were cut off as another blast rocked the ship, this one even more devastating than the last. The lights flickered, and the air filled with the acrid smell of smoke. "Shields down to 20%, Dr. Kale warned, his voice rising in panic. "We can't take another hit." Elara's heart pounded as she weighed the options. They were out of time. "Do it," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Engage the wormhole now." The crew hesitated for only a moment before complying. The ship's engines roared to life, their pitch rising to a deafening crescendo as the crystal's energy surged through the systems. The viewscreen flickered, then filled with a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The wormhole, unstable but open. "Hold on," Elara shouted as the ship lurched forward, its frame groaning under the strain. The Arbiter's fleet fired one last volley, their weapons blazing through the void, but it was too late. The Elysian Dawn shot into the wormhole, the fabric of space and time bending around it. The crew clung to their stations, their breaths held as the ship was pulled into the maelstrom. For a moment, it seemed as though the ship would be torn apart, its systems pushed beyond their limits. But then, with a final, shuddering jolt, they emerged on the other side. The silence that followed was deafening. The crew stared at the viewscreen, now filled with the serene expanse of a distant star system. The Arbiter's fleet was gone, left behind in the chaos of the wormhole's collapse. They had made it, but the cost was clear. The ship's systems were fried, its hull scorched and battered. And the crew, though alive, was shaken to their core. Elara exhaled slowly, her hands trembling as she released the console. "We're alive," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "But this isn't over. The crystal's power is still with us, and so is the responsibility that comes with it. We've survived this, but the challenges ahead will only get harder." "Are you with me?" The crew turned to her, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. One by one, they nodded, their trust in her leadership reaffirmed. They had faced the impossible and come out the other side, but the journey wasn't over. The crystal's power had changed everything, and the choices they made next would define not just their mission, but their legacy. The stars stretched out before them, vast and uncharted, and the Elysian Dawn pressed on, its crew united once more. The wormhole tore open like a wound in the fabric of space, its maw shimmering with chaotic, swirling energies. The Elysian Dawn hurtled into the breach, its hull groaning under the unimaginable strain. Inside, the crew clung to their stations, the ship shuddering violently as if it might come apart at any moment. Alarms blared, and sparks erupted from overloaded consoles, casting flickering shadows across the tense faces of the crew. Elara stood at the helm, her hands gripping the edges of the control panel as she focused on the crystal's pulsing energy within her. Its light surged through her veins, a torrent of power that both anchored and overwhelmed her. She could feel the ship's systems straining to hold together, their limits pushed to the brink. With a deep breath, she reached out through the crystal, weaving its energy into the ship's failing systems. The chaotic vibrations began to steady, the ship's violent shaking subsiding into a more manageable hum. But the effort was immense, and Elara could feel the toll it was taking on her body and mind. As the ship stabilized, Elara's vision blurred. The bridge seemed to dissolve around her, replaced by fragmented images from her past. She was back on her homeworld, standing in the shadow of her mentor, his voice sharp with disapproval. "You're not ready for this," he said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. The scene shifted, and she was a young cadet again, staring at the wreckage of a failed mission, the weight of lives lost pressing down on her chest. Each memory was vivid, raw, and inescapable, as though the wormhole had reached into her mind and dredged up every doubt, every failure she'd ever buried. On the bridge, the crew watched in alarm as Elara's body tensed, her eyes distant and unseeing. Rin was the first to act, rushing to her side. "Captain," she called, her voice urgent. "Elara, can you hear me?" But Elara was lost in the storm of her own mind, the crystal's power amplifying her fears, her regrets, her deepest insecurities. The crew exchanged worried glances, their earlier unity faltering in the face of her vulnerability. Jack stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with concern. "We need to anchor her. If she loses control, the ship goes with her." His words spurred the crew into action. Tessa adjusted the ship's power flow to reduce the strain on Elara, while Dr. Kale monitored her vital signs, his brow furrowed with worry. Rin gripped Elara's hand, her voice soft but insistent. "You're not alone in this. We're here with you. You just need to find your way back." Elara's mind was a battleground, the weight of her past threatening to crush her. But amidst the chaos, she heard Rin's voice, faint but persistent, cutting through the noise. It was a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She clung to it, using it to steady herself. Slowly, painfully, she began to push back against the storm, her resolve hardening with each passing moment. The crystal's power surged again, but this time, she was ready. She channeled it with precision, weaving it through the ship's systems like a master craftsman, restoring a fragile artifact. The ship steadied further, the violent tremors subsiding into a controlled vibration. Elara's vision cleared, the hallucinations fading as she regained her grip on reality. She looked around the bridge, her crew's faces filled with relief and determination. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I couldn't have done that without you." But the ordeal wasn't over. The wormhole's exit loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of light and shadow that promised both salvation and danger. The ship's systems were still fragile, and the crew knew they weren't out of the storm yet. Elara straightened, her gaze fixed on the view screen. "We're almost there," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "Stay sharp. We've come too far to falter now." The crew nodded, their trust in her leadership reaffirmed. They had faced the storm together, and though the journey had tested them in ways they could never have imagined, they had emerged stronger for it. The Elysian Dawn pressed on, its crew united by their shared trials and the unshakable belief that they could overcome whatever lay ahead. The wormhole's chaotic energies still raged around them, but within the ship, there was a newfound sense of calm, a quiet determination to see the journey through, no matter the cost. The Elysian Dawn burst from the wormhole like a comet, streaking across the void, its battered hull glowing faintly from the strain of the journey. Around them stretched an unfamiliar expanse of stars, their patterns unrecognizable and eerily silent. The ship's systems sputtered and hissed, the once steady hum of the engines now a weak, intermittent groan. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the relief of escaping the Arbiter's fleet, tempered by the sobering reality of their situation. They were stranded in uncharted space, far from home, with no clear path back. Elara scanned the damage reports, flooding her console, her expression grim. "Engines are down to 20% functionality," she announced, her voice steady despite the weight of the news. "Shields are barely holding, and life support is running on backup power. We need to prioritize repairs, or we're not going anywhere." The crew nodded, their earlier unity fraying under the strain of exhaustion and uncertainty. Rin was the first to move, her hands already flying over the engineering console. "I'll start with the engines," she said, her voice tense with determination. "If we can get them back online, we might have a chance to navigate out of here." Jax, ever the pragmatist, joined her, his focus sharp despite the fatigue etched into his features. "I'll handle the power grid. We need to stabilize the core before it overloads." As the crew worked, the tension on the bridge grew thicker. The adrenaline of their escape had worn off, leaving behind the raw edges of fear and frustration. Dr. Kale broke the silence, his tone uncharacteristically sharp. "This is what happens when we push too far, too fast. We're lucky to be alive, but for how long? The crystal's power is too dangerous. We should have left it behind." His words hung in the air, a challenge to Elara's leadership and the choices that had brought them here. Elara felt the weight of his words, her confidence wavering as she stared at the flickering console. She had led them this far, but at what cost? The ship was crippled, the crew was divided, and the crystal's power, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a burden she couldn't fully understand. Her doubts threatened to overwhelm her, but before she could respond, Tessa approached, her expression soft but resolute. "Captain," Tessa began, her voice quiet but steady. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Elara nodded, following her to a quieter corner of the bridge. Tessa's shoulder was still bandaged from the earlier skirmish, but her strength seemed undiminished. "I know you're carrying a lot right now," she said, her tone gentle. "But you need to remember why we're here. We chose this mission not just for the crystal, but for what it represents." A chance to learn, to grow, to protect what we care about. You've always led us with that in mind. Elara looked at her, the weight of Tessa's words sinking in. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Every decision feels like it could cost us everything. What if I'm wrong? Tessa placed a hand on her shoulder, her grip firm but reassuring. You're not alone in this. None of us have all the answers, but we trust you to guide us. And that's enough. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. Her words were simple, but they carried a profound truth. Elara's shoulders relaxed, the tension in her chest easing as she took a deep breath. With renewed resolve, she returned to the bridge, her voice calm but commanding. We've faced worse than this, she said, addressing the crew, and we've always come through because we've worked together. Right now, that's what matters most. Rin, Jax, keep working on the engines. Dr. Kale, focus on life support. Tessa, coordinate communications and see if we can get a signal out. We're not giving up, not now. The crew responded with quiet determination, their earlier tension giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. The repairs were slow and painstaking, but they worked in unison, each member playing their part. Elara watched them, her earlier doubts replaced by a quiet confidence. They were a team flawed, yes, but unbroken, and as long as they stood together, they had a chance. The stars outside might be unfamiliar, but the path forward was clear. Together, they would find a way home. The hum of the Elysian Dawn's repair work filled the air, a symphony of clanking tools and murmured instructions as the crew worked tirelessly to restore the ship's battered systems. Rin and Jax had managed to stabilize the engines, though they were far from full strength, and Tessa had rerouted power to keep life support running. The tension on the bridge had eased slightly, replaced by a quiet determination to push forward. But just as the crew began to feel a glimmer of hope, a faint signal crackled through the ship's comms. Elara's attention snapped to the console, her fingers flying over the controls as she isolated the transmission. The signal was weak, barely discernible against the background noise of space, but its pattern was unmistakable. This can't be a coincidence, she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. The language, it matches the hieroglyphs we found in the labyrinth. It's from the lost civilization. The crew gathered around, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Rin's eyes lit up with excitement. If this signal is coming from a nearby planet, it could mean we're not alone out here. Maybe there's another piece of the puzzle, something that can help us understand the crystal's power and find a way home. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but Jax remained cautious, his arms crossed as he studied the data. Or it could be another trap. We don't know what we're walking into. Elara considered his words, her gaze fixed on the signal's source, a small, verdant planet, glowing faintly in the distance. We can't afford to ignore this, she said finally. If there's even a chance it could lead us closer to answers, we have to take it, but we'll proceed carefully. Rin, Jax, prepare a shuttle. We'll go down in a small team. The rest of you, stay here and keep working on the ship. We'll need it ready when we return. The shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, its sensors picking up signs of life almost immediately. Lush forests stretched as far as the eye could see, their vibrant greens and blues a stark contrast to the desolation of the labyrinth. As they touched down in a clearing, the crew stepped out cautiously, their weapons at the ready, but what they found was nothing like they expected. A group of figures emerged from the trees, their movements graceful and unhurried. They were humanoid, their features strikingly similar to those of the crew, but their skin shimmered faintly, as though infused with the same energy as the crystal. One of them stepped forward, their voice calm and melodic. "We've been expecting you," they said, their words translated seamlessly by the shuttle's systems. "The crystal has chosen you, just as it chose us long ago." Elara exchanged a glance with her team, her mind racing. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone respectful but firm. The figure smiled, their expression warm. "We are the descendants of the civilization you seek. When our ancestors fell, a few of us survived, fleeing to this planet to rebuild. Over time, we learned to live in harmony with the crystal's energy, using it to sustain our lives rather than destroy them. And now, it seems, the crystal has led you to us." The crew listened in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them. These weren't just survivors. They were living proof that the crystal's power could be wielded responsibly, a beacon of hope in a galaxy filled with uncertainty. But the figure's next words carried a warning. "We will help you, but only if you prove yourselves worthy. The crystal's power is not a gift, it is a test. And those who fail that test risk repeating the mistakes of the past." Elara nodded, her resolve hardening. "What must we do?" she asked. The figure gestured toward a distant ridge, where a faint glow pulsed in rhythm with the crystal's energy. "There, you will face the trial of balance. It will challenge not just your strength, but your understanding of the crystal's true purpose. Succeed, and we will share our knowledge. Fail, and you will leave with nothing." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the stakes clear. This wasn't just about survival, it was about proving they could handle the responsibility that came with the crystal's power. Elara stepped forward, her voice steady. "We'll take the trial, but know this. We're not here to take what isn't ours. We're here to learn, to grow, and to ensure the mistakes of the past aren't repeated." The figure nodded, their expression unreadable. "Then let the trial begin. May the crystal guide you." As the crew set off toward the ridge, the air thick with anticipation, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a test. It was a turning point, a chance to prove not just to the colonists, but to themselves, that they were worthy of the power they carried. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The journey was far from over, and the choices they made next would shape not just their fate, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The trial of balance began not with a challenge of strength, but with a test of wisdom. The crew stood before a massive stone archway, its surface etched with the same cryptic symbols they had seen in the labyrinth. Beyond it lay a series of chambers, each one designed to push them beyond their limits. The first trial was simple in concept, but deceptively difficult in execution. A labyrinth of mirrors, each one reflecting not just their physical forms, but their innermost fears and insecurities. "This is about more than finding the way out," Elara said, her voice steady. "It's about confronting what holds us back." One by one, the crew stepped into the labyrinth, their reflections distorting into haunting images of their past mistakes and deepest doubts. Jax froze in front of a reflection of himself, younger and angrier, standing amidst the wreckage of a mission gone wrong. Rin faced a vision of herself, surrounded by failed experiments and broken promises, her ambition crumbling under the weight of her own expectations. Each member of the crew was forced to confront their flaws head-on, the mirrors forcing them to acknowledge the parts of themselves they had long buried. Elara's trial was no less harrowing. Her reflection twisted into the face of her late mentor, his voice cold and accusing. "You're not ready for this," he said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. "You'll lead them to their doom." For a moment, she faltered, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her, but then she straightened, her voice firm as she addressed the reflection. "I may not be perfect, but I'm not alone, and that's what makes me strong." The mirror shattered, and she stepped forward, her resolve unshaken. The second trial tested their courage. The crew found themselves in a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with glowing crystals that pulsed with a faint, menacing light. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested a single crystal shard, its energy unstable and erratic. "Take it," a voice echoed through the chamber. "But know this, holding it will burn you." The crew hesitated, the stakes clear. To take the shard was to endure pain, but to leave it behind was to fail the trial. Jack stepped forward first, his pragmatism clashing with his instinct to protect the crew. "We can't afford to back down now," he said, his tone grim. He reached for the shard, his hand trembling as the energy seared his skin. Rin followed, her determination outweighing her fear, and one by one, the crew took their turn, each one enduring the pain to prove their commitment to the mission. By the time they left the chamber, their hands were scorched and blistered, but their unity was stronger than ever. The final trial was the most difficult, and it fell to Elara alone. She was led to a vast open chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow and its floor covered in a thin layer of water that rippled with every step. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested the crystal, its light steady and serene. To pass this trial, the colonists explained, "You must relinquish control. Trust us to guide you even when the path is uncertain." Elara hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to hold on, to maintain control. But then she thought of her crew, of the sacrifices they had made, and the trust they had placed in her. She thought of the crystal, its power not a burden to bear alone, but a responsibility to share. With a deep breath, she placed the crystal on the pedestal and stepped back, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. The room filled with a soft, golden light, and the colonists appeared around her, their expressions warm and approving. "You've proven yourself worthy," they said, their voices echoing with a quiet reverence. "The crystal's power is not meant to be controlled, but to be guided. And in relinquishing control, you've shown the true meaning of leadership." As the light faded, Elara felt a profound sense of clarity. The crystal's energy still pulsed within her, but it no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a gift, one she could share with her crew and use to build a better future. The colonists led her back to the shuttle, their earlier sternness replaced with a quiet respect. "We will help you repair your ship," they said, their tone firm but kind. "And we will provide you with a map to return home. But remember, the journey is far from over. The choices you make next will shape not just your fate, but the fate of the galaxy." The crew returned to the Elysian Dawn with a renewed sense of purpose, their earlier fractures healed by the trials they had faced together. The colonists worked alongside them, their advanced technology speeding the repairs and their wisdom guiding their hands. As the ship's systems came back online, the crew couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of hope. They had faced the unknown and emerged stronger for it, their unity unshakable and their resolve unwavering. Elara stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The colonists had given them more than just a map. They had given them a new understanding of the crystal's power and their place in the universe. The journey home would be long, but it was a journey they would face together, their shared experiences shaping not just their mission, but their legacy. And as the Elysian Dawn powered up, its engines humming with renewed strength, Elara knew one thing for certain. The stars ahead were calling, and they were ready to answer. The Elysian Dawn hummed with renewed energy as its systems came back online, the colonists' advanced technology blending seamlessly with the ship's design. The crew moved with purpose, their earlier exhaustion replaced by a quiet determination. But just as the final repairs were completed, the ship's sensors blared an urgent warning. On the view screen, the Arbiter's fleet emerged from the void, their sleek, silver ships forming a menacing blockade. The Arbiter's flagship loomed at the center, its weapons glowing ominously as it transmitted a single, terse message: return the crystal or face annihilation. The crew froze, the tension on the bridge palpable. Elara's mind raced, her thoughts turning to the colonists who had helped them. Before she could respond, the colonists' fleet appeared in a flash of golden light, their ships forming a protective barrier between the Elysian Dawn and the Arbiter's forces. The contrast was striking. The colonists' vessels were organic in design, their surfaces alive with shimmering energy that pulsed in harmony with the crystal. A transmission crackled through, the colonists' leader speaking with calm authority. "This is our home. You will not take what is ours." The Arbiter's voice cut through the tension, cold and unyielding. "The crystal belongs to us. You have no claim to its power." The standoff was fraught with tension, the two fleets locked in a silent battle of wills. Elara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. "There's another way," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "This doesn't have to end in conflict. We can find a solution that benefits everyone." The Arbiter's gaze narrowed, their expression unreadable. "And what solution would that be?" they demanded. Elara took a deep breath, her mind racing as she formulated her proposal. The crystal's power isn't something to be hoarded or fought over. It's a responsibility, one that requires understanding and cooperation. If we work together, we can unlock its potential without repeating the mistakes of the past. We'll share the knowledge we've gained, but only if you agree to a truce. The colonists' leader stepped forward, their expression thoughtful. "The crystal has chosen her," they said, their voice carrying a quiet certainty. "If she believes this is the way, then we will honor her decision." The Arbiter hesitated, their earlier resolve wavering as they considered the proposal. The silence stretched, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Finally, the Arbiter nodded, their tone grudging but resolute. "A truce, then. But know this, if the crystal's power is misused, we will not hesitate to intervene." Elara's relief was palpable, but she kept her expression neutral. "Understood," she replied, We'll ensure its power is used responsibly. That's a promise." As the two fleets parted ways, the tension on the Elysian Dawn's bridge eased, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. The crew had faced impossible odds and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger for it. Elara turned to her team, her voice soft but filled with determination. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's just the beginning. We've been given a chance to shape the future, and we can't afford to waste it." The crew nodded, their unity unshakable as they prepared for the journey ahead. The stars stretched out before them, vast and uncharted, but the path forward was clear. Together, they would carry the crystal's legacy into the unknown, guided by the lessons of the past and the promise of a brighter future. And as the Elysian Dawn powered up, its engines humming with renewed strength, Elara couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of hope. The galaxy was vast, but their resolve was greater. And with the crystal's power as their guide, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The Elysian Dawn glided silently through the veil of eternity, its golden hull shimmering faintly against the swirling chaos of the barrier. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, almost reverent, as the crew took a moment to reflect on everything they had endured. The journey had changed them, not just as individuals, but as a team. The once daunting veil now felt like an old friend, its chaotic currents a reminder of how far they had come. Rin stood at the observation deck, her fingers tracing the faint scar on her palm from the trial of balance. "I used to think the answers were out there," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of introspection. "But now I realize they were inside us all along. We just had to find them." Her words hung in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the growth each of them had undergone. Jax, ever the pragmatist, leaned against the bulkhead, his arms crossed. "I still think we could have done without the near-death experiences," he quipped, though his tone lacked its usual edge. "But I'll admit, I wouldn't trade this crew for anything. We've been through hell and back, and we're still standing. That counts for something." His words brought a rare smile to the faces of those around him, a testament to the bonds forged in the fires of their trials. Tessa, her shoulder still bandaged but healing, moved to stand beside Elara. "Do you think we'll ever feel like we belong back home?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "After everything we've seen, everything we've learned, it's hard to imagine going back to normal." Elara placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "Home isn't just a place," she replied. "It's the people who make it one, and no matter where we go, we'll always have each other." Elara's gaze drifted to the crystal, now securely housed in the ship's core. Its light pulsed gently, a constant reminder of the power they carried, not just in its energy, but in the lessons it had taught them. The crystal wasn't the treasure they had set out to find. It was the catalyst that had revealed their true strengths and weaknesses. It had forced them to confront their fears, to trust one another, and to grow in ways they never thought possible. As the ship emerged from the veil and into the familiar expanse of their home system, the crew gathered on the bridge. The sight of their son, warm and welcoming, brought a collective sigh of relief, but the moment was bittersweet. They had left as explorers, driven by curiosity and ambition. They returned as something more, survivors, guardians, and heroes. A transmission crackled through the comms, the voice of their commanding officer breaking the silence. Welcome home, Elysian Dawn. Your mission has been the talk of the fleet. You've done the impossible, and we're eager to hear your story. The crew exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of pride and apprehension. They had been gone for what felt like a lifetime, and the world they were returning to seemed smaller somehow, less vast than the one they had just left. Elara stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the crew. "This isn't the end," she said, her tone carrying both conviction and warmth. "It's the beginning of something new. We've been given a gift, not just the crystal, but the chance to shape the future, and we're going to do it together." Her words resonated with the crew, their earlier unease giving way to a quiet determination. As the Elysian Dawn docked at the spaceport, the crew was greeted with cheers and applause. Crowds had gathered to welcome them, their faces filled with admiration and awe. Elara stood at the forefront, her posture confident but her mind already racing ahead. The accolades were nice, but they were fleeting. The real work was just beginning. She glanced back at her crew, their faces illuminated by the glow of the crystal. They had faced the unknown and emerged stronger for it. The veil of eternity had tested them, the labyrinth had shaped them, and the crystal had transformed them. But the greatest treasure they had found wasn't power or knowledge. It was the unshakable bond they now shared, a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The stars were calling, and the 9 Cosmic Voyagers were ready to answer. The Elysian Dawn touched down gently at the home port, its golden hull gleaming under the soft light of their sun. The crew stepped out one by one, their faces a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Crowds had gathered to welcome them, their cheers echoing across the spaceport like a symphony of gratitude and admiration. But for Elara, the moment felt surreal. She carried the crystal in a containment unit, its soft glow a constant reminder of the journey they had undertaken, and the one still ahead. As she stepped off the ship, the weight of the crystal in her hands felt both literal and symbolic. It was more than just a source of power. It was a testament to everything they had overcome. She glanced back at her crew, their faces etched with the same mix of pride and reflection. They had been through hell and back, and now, standing on familiar ground, it was hard to believe they were the same people who had set out all those months ago. The ceremony that followed was a blur of speeches, medals, and applause. Yet amidst the celebration, Elara's thoughts drifted to the stars. She looked up at the sky, its vastness calling to her like an old friend. The veil of eternity, the labyrinth, the trials, they had all been steps on a path that stretched far beyond what they could see. And now, with the crystal in her hands, she knew their journey was far from over. The crew gathered around her, their unity unshaken despite the challenges they had faced. Rin stood to her left, her eyes alight with the thrill of discovery, while Jax, ever the realist, scanned the horizon with a quiet determination. Tessa, still healing from her injuries, offered a small smile, her resilience a quiet testament to the strength they had all found within themselves. Together, they were more than a crew. They were a family, bound by shared experiences and an unshakable belief in what they could achieve. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the port in hues of orange and gold, Elara took a deep breath. The crystal's glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, a silent promise of the adventures yet to come. The crew began to walk forward, their steps in sync, as they moved toward the unknown. Behind them, the Elysian Dawn stood as a symbol of their resilience, its golden hull catching the last rays of sunlight. But as the camera panned upward, the sky above began to shift. A new cosmic storm brewed on the edge of the horizon, its swirling energy a stark contrast to the calm of the sunset. It was a reminder that the universe was vast and unpredictable, filled with mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Elara paused for a moment, her gaze fixed on the storm. She felt a familiar pull, a quiet call to explore, to discover, to push the boundaries of what they thought possible. With a final glance at her crew, she smiled. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet anticipation. The crew nodded, their resolve unshaken. They had faced the unknown before, and they would do it again, together. As they walked into the sunset, the camera lingered on the storm above, its swirling energy a tantalizing hint of what lay ahead. The stars stretched out endlessly, a canvas of possibility waiting to be painted. And as the screen faded to black, one thing was clear. The Nine Cosmic Voyagers story was far from over. The universe was calling, and they were ready to answer.